everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Built to Scale, Creative Forces Clinical Research Program Expansion. I'm Sunil, Iyengar, Director of the Office of Research and Analysis at the National Endowment for the Arts. One of the NEA's proudest contributions to the health and well-being of individuals and communities through the arts projects and programs we support is embodied in Creative Forces. This is the NEA's partnership with the U.S. Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs that seeks to improve the health, well-being, and quality of life for military and veteran populations exposed to trauma, as well as their families and caregivers. As many of you know, this initiative places creative arts therapies in music, visual art, and dance, as well as expressive writing, at the core of patient-centered care at clinical sites throughout the country, including telehealth sites. We have other partners too, which I hasten to acknowledge. They include the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, Americans for the Arts, and for the community engagement grant-making piece of this initiative, Mid-America Arts Alliance. I encourage you to visit the Creative Forces National Resource Center at creativeforcesnrc.arts.gov. Only don't do so just now. I mean, not when we have such a great panel lined up for you. In a moment, we'll learn about 4 new studies that mark a deliberate expansion of our clinical research capacity within Creative Forces. Let me step back and explain. The NEA's research office has been working with the Creative Forces leadership team throughout the past several years to ensure that research and ongoing evaluation are fully integrated with this initiative, particularly since the stakes are so high and the opportunities so promising for our military personnel, veterans, and their caregivers and families. This is why working with creative arts therapists throughout our network and consulting experts in adjacent fields of research and practice, we co-developed a long-term research plan to guide data collection and reporting efforts that can yield lessons not only for the leadership of this initiative and the creative arts therapists and other caregivers who are part of it, but also for practitioners, policymakers, and other researchers focused on arts and health programs and therapies to combat trauma in military and veteran populations. The long-term research plan's 3 objectives were to develop a multi-tiered governance structure, to build organizational capacity to drive such research, and to expand existing research projects and processes. Remarkable strides have been made with these objectives thanks to Creative Forces Clinical Research Director, Dr. Donna and the enterprising but truly collaborative efforts of creative arts therapists across the network. One of our sub-goals all along has been the solicitation of what we might call extramural partnerships and collaborations to support and drive research. The idea here was to enrich the Creative Forces clinical research portfolio, not only with studies that may emerge organically at these sites, but also by inviting in experts from multiple scientific disciplines to converge on clinical research opportunities for the communities we serve. Today, you will be hearing from investigators of 4 pilot studies exploring the feasibility of randomized controlled trials to better understand the clinical benefits of music therapy and art therapy for traumatized military personnel and veterans. Before handing it over to Dr. Betts, I just want to say a word on randomized controlled studies, often viewed as the gold standard for evaluating health interventions. It may be surprising, but even within the arts, there are many precedents for this type of research involving creative arts therapies, but also arts programs in health or other outcome domains, such as education. Many of these studies have been supported by the Research Awards program that my office oversees at the NEA, but we also support studies using a diversity of methodologies, whether qualitative, mixed methods, community-based participatory studies, or other types of research and evaluation projects. I urge you to visit arts.gov and look at these opportunities for the NEA research grants in the arts and the NEA research labs. The application deadline is March 28th. And for those of you who follow music and music therapy research in particular, you may want to visit the Sound Health Network at University of California, San Francisco, our partner in advancing research and practitioner networking in the fields of music, health, and wellness. This work has been fostered also by a partnership we have with the National Institutes of Health to support more research on music and health and music therapy. So with that, like I said, don't go to these websites yet. Stay with us right here. I'm going to turn it over to Creative Forces' amazing clinical research director, Dr. Betts, who will be moderating this panel. I'm sure you'll be as inspired by the work of these co-investigators as I am. Donna?
Thank you so much, Sunil. And welcome everyone. This is such a wonderful opportunity to inform a range of audiences about the exciting research that our clinicians, academic partners, and colleagues are engaged in. And this webinar today coincides with Creative Arts Therapies Week, a great time to explore groundbreaking research in art therapy and music therapy. In 2019, Creative Forces initiated a process of developing conceptual frameworks for art therapy, music therapy, dance movement therapy, and therapeutic writing. These frameworks guide research proposals toward the clinical needs of military-connected patients served by Creative Forces and similar programs. For art therapy and music therapy, the prioritized research questions derived from the conceptual frameworks include underlying hypotheses based on theory and research in their respective fields. From there, we developed a funding mechanism with support from our partner, the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. And in 2021, we issued requests for applications for pilot studies that could serve as the basis for larger scale studies that Sunil referred to. 4 teams were selected for funding, and we're delighted to have some of our leading researchers with us today to discuss these studies. I'd like to welcome Dr. Yoka Bradt, Dr. Anjan Chatterjee, Dr. Maya Story, and Dr. John Williamson. So let's get right to the questions, starting with Dr. Chatterjee.
So thank you for inviting us here. And I'd like to thank both the National Endowment for the Arts and Sunil and Henry Jackson Foundation and Donna Betts for this invitation. I'm a neurologist and cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm excited to be here participating in this. This collaboration that we are engaged in, for me, has a long arc of a story that comes in 5 parts. 30 years ago, I was on faculty at the University of Alabama in Birmingham and met one of our star neurology residents, Danny Potts, who has since gone on to become a major proponent for art therapy in people with Alzheimer's disease. Through him, I met an art therapist named Angel Duncan, and we ended up doing a deep dive into what was known about the efficacy of art therapy in Alzheimer's disease and published a review paper. And that was the first time I had a chance to look at art therapy as an academician. Around the same time, I got introduced to Juliet King, who was in Indiana at the time. The chair of neurology there, Bob Pascuzzi, is someone I knew for about 20 years. We had been on a national panel together. Both of them invited me to Indianapolis to give a talk to neurology and to the School of Design. I think it's Heron School of Design in Indianapolis. And Juliet, I think, was prescient in recognizing that the neuroscience of aesthetics and creativity perhaps had something useful to contribute to how we think about art therapy. And the year after that, she organized another one-day symposium dedicated to that proposition. The next step was when Donna was the president of the American Arts Therapy Association, and she and that group invited me to give a talk to their national meeting, and I talked about the neuropsychology of art. And that was the first time I encountered art therapy as an organization and as an institution. And shortly after that, again, Juliet introduced me to the leadership at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence at Walter Reed, who then invited me to come and talk at their research fair, which happened this past fall, actually the fall of 2020. It was the first public talk I gave since the onset of the pandemic at that time. And I have to say, visiting NICO at Walter Reed, I was completely blown away. I was blown away by the infrastructure, by the amazing work they were doing, that the people who were there. And I left with this kind of good feeling that we really should do something together. And so that we left it at that. And then fortuitously, shortly after that, the call for proposals for this award mechanism came out. And so as a result, I ended up finding that working with Chandler Rhodes and Melissa Walker at NICO, along with Adrian Stamper and Andy Srikanchanan, Janelle Sosa and Kaylee Scott, along with my group. It just made for a wonderful fit in our work. And just to give you some context of what we had been doing, I had started working on neuroaesthetics a while ago, but it really started to become a major part of my research program in the last few years. I started the Penn Center for Neuroaesthetics 3 years ago. And one of the things we're particularly interested in is the relationship between visual depiction and art, its expressive and emotional power, and its relationship to language, and what the biology underlying those three things were. And so with that interest, and some new analytic techniques that we were trying to develop to try to understand a taxonomy around how we think about art. It was just perfect timing for all of this to come together with the resources and infrastructure and personnel at NICO, with what we were doing in the lab, to just jump right in and do this. And so once again, I'm very thankful to the NEA and to Henry Jackson Foundation for making this a reality.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chatterjee. It's great to hear that from you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Maya Story. Welcome, Dr. Story. And if you could please describe to us how your team's collaboration came together and what inspired your actual research idea once your team was formed.
Sure, thank you, Donna. The Familia, which is the feasibility and acceptability of music imagery and listening interventions for analgesia, which is a long title, so it's easier to just say Familia, is exploring 2 different music interventions for pain that are both delivered through telehealth. One involves meeting one time with a music therapist to talk about music listening, and then the veteran listens to music on their own during the length of the study. And the other involves meeting with the music therapist weekly for music imagery sessions. So we were curious about music listening, which has been used in studies quite a bit, but often it's a one-time intervention, frequently with no music therapist involvement, and often for acute pain as opposed to chronic pain. So we wanted to know, is music listening helpful for chronic pain, but especially if it's used regularly and becomes a tool for the veteran to access when needed. And then in addition to just music listening, there are receptive music therapy interventions that involve music listening but have additional components. And music imagery is one of these interventions. So the aim of music imagery is not only to use music for relaxation or music for distraction, as it often is in music listening, but to explore the veteran's relationship with their pain and potentially gain a new perspective on how to manage it. So that's a little bit about the study itself, but to the question of the team forming, in 2020, I started a fellowship at the VA Research Center in Indianapolis called the Center for Health Information and Communication, or CHIC is what we call it for short. And Dr. Sherry Robb, who's a music therapist and researcher at Indiana University and also on our research team, connected me with the fellowship program director there at the VA Center. And I think I'm unique in that I'm the only creative arts therapist who actually is an investigator with a home in a VA HS R&D research center. And so during my time there, I've had a mentor panel of senior researchers who have been working with me, including Dr. Baer, who's a general internist and known as an investigator for his research with veterans with chronic pain using non-pharmacological interventions. And Dr. Bravata, who's also a general internist and an investigator in the area of vascular disease and patients with complex medical needs. But she also has an interest in the creative arts and health. So when we saw the announcement for this funding from Creative Forces Network, we felt that we already had a strong team in place with music therapists and senior investigators with strong backgrounds in clinical trials, and an interest in the research areas that Creative Forces Network had identified. And in addition, we had a music therapist at the Indianapolis VA who was a Creative Forces Network music therapist as well, Leah Whitmer, who has advanced training in the particular intervention that we're using that involves music and imagery that I've been studying in previous research. So it kind of just all came together and fell together nicely in that way.
That's great, Dr. Story. And then can you just elucidate a little bit as to how is this preliminary study situated within your larger research program?
Sure. In terms of the VA research center that I'm at CHEEK, part of their mission is to advance healthcare through technology. And there's a focus right now on telehealth as well as on chronic pain. And since Familia is being delivered through telehealth, it fits in with the focus of the center at this time. And as a whole, with the emphasis on chronic pain. Within my own personal research program, I think that my meta view of research is about the integration of arts and health and increasing access of creative arts therapy and options to support health. But my research with veterans began about 6 years ago with research into music imagery for veteran women with post-traumatic stress disorder. And this current study builds on that music imagery research that I had started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Story, and we'll look forward to hearing a little more from you shortly. Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Williamson to join us to speak a little bit about his research as well. Hi, Dr. Williamson.
There, and hello, everyone. And I'd like to also thank Creative Forces and the Henry Jackson Foundation for the opportunity to work on this project. It's been a great and interesting experience for me thus far. So I'm a neuropsychologist, and I have a dual appointment at the University of Florida in the Center for OCD and Anxiety-Related Disorders, and in the VA at the Brain Rehabilitation Research Center. And for many, many years, through affiliation with a group led by Ken Heilman, we've talked about creativity and the neuropsychology of creative experience, including the arts and writing and music and such. And my work has been in mechanisms of traumatic brain injury effects on neuroplasticity and recovery, including sequelae of TBI in veterans post-traumatic stress disorder, which is part of the mission of the Brain Rehabilitation Research Center, to understand mechanisms of injury and how to improve outcomes associated with it. So one day, Keith White, who's a psychology professor at the University of Florida, and Dr. Heilman contacted me to talk about this RFA for creative forces and art therapy. So we had a brainstorming session, and this was interdisciplinary and part of our creative process. So we have neurology, psychology, physiatry. Dr. Levy, Charles Levy, is part of our team, and I've known him for many years, previously leading our VA's traumatic brain injury program before he moved into a more prominent role with creative forces. We have art graduate students on our team, and they were part of this brainstorming meeting. So I had not previously thought about art therapy in the context of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm actually pretty terrible at visual arts, but it's still quite interesting. And we began to talk about what would be the mechanisms that would be relevant to having a positive effect on PTSD. Why is this potentially an alternative and perhaps even better for many veterans than a conventional approach, such as the currently available empirically supported cognitive behavioral therapy type treatments, cognitive processing therapies, and other therapies? And what's the same between art therapy and these other treatments? Why might there be similarities in mechanism that would be present? So we had many different brainstorming meetings to talk about this and how we would develop this collaboration. So who would do what and how would we do it and so on. In the context of my own work with post-traumatic stress disorder, I've been working on a technology called transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation. We have several protocols active with this, which has some interaction in terms of functional neuroanatomy that I think is relevant to the artistic process. We also considered how the experience for the veteran with art might be more palatable than some of the more verbal psychotherapeutic approaches for treating this population. So in that context, we decided that we would try to see, well, let's look at in a comprehensive way the neurophysiological response of the veteran to art therapy. So we're measuring functional imaging, which is something that my team does before and after art therapy, as well as common symptoms associated with PTSD. The most common symptom is sleep disruption with post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're measuring sleep throughout our art therapy protocol, which will be administered by Heather Spooner, who is a Creative Forces art therapist housed within RVA in Gainesville, and some standard metrics of PTSD symptoms, and we'll see how that changes over time and how those changes in the milieu of symptoms and comorbidities of post-traumatic stress disorder change over time and manifest in some of our neurophysiological indicators in a logical way. So we'll be measuring frontal limbic activities, the emotional brain and such, and how this modifies with therapy, which prior interventions have been shown to affect.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dr. Williamson. Look forward to hearing more from you shortly. First, though, we are going to speak now with Dr. Yoka Bradt. Hi, Yoka.
Hi.
Welcome, and we'd love to hear from you as well, of course, on how your team's collaboration came together and what inspired your actual research idea once that team was formed.
Thank you, Donna. And I too want to thank Creative Forces and the Henry Jackson Foundation for this wonderful opportunity. So actually, when this RFA came out, it fit right into the work that my lab was already doing. I had been doing for many years research on the effect of music therapy interventions for chronic pain management, but with civilian populations, not in military populations yet. And I have been working though with Rebecca Vaudreuil, who's a lead music therapist in Creative Forces on music therapy research with military populations. And I had also been working with her in adapting a group protocol that we had developed and tested with civilians in terms of its efficacy for chronic pain, core outcomes in chronic pain management. And so we had been working together quite a while in adapting that protocol to make sure it fits military culture and values and beliefs, as well as the clinical reality of Creative Forces music therapists working at these sites. And so when the RFA came out, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to actually begin testing the feasibility of this intervention. So I knew that Creative Forces was interested with this RFA to kind of expand their research network, and so I consulted with Rebecca to see which Creative Forces music therapist should I talk to, which would be a good site to try to test the feasibility of this protocol. And so she highly recommended that I talk with Danielle Kalset, who is a music therapist at JBER in Alaska. And so checked in with Danielle. She was immediately very excited because, as probably comes as no surprise to many of you, service members, active duty service members have quite a high prevalence of chronic pain. So of course she was working with a lot of service members with chronic pain. And then, yeah, from there the ball kept rolling. We checked in with her supervisor, Major Trahan. And then she recommended that we need to make sure we get some other specialists on our team, pain specialists, mild traumatic brain injury specialists. And so our team kept growing. And so we also have Major Derek Bradley from JBER on our team. He is the medical director of the JBER Pain Clinic. And we also had Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, who is a neurologist, join our team. She, in the meantime, has been deployed, so she no longer is at our team. So we decided to conduct a feasibility study really to test the acceptability and meaningfulness of this intervention for active duty service members, because even though the protocol had been found to be effective to improve pain-related self-efficacy and reduce pain interference in civilians, we actually had no idea if this protocol would be equally acceptable and meaningful for active duty service members. And we had to test preliminary effect of the protocol before we can move any further. So yeah, we're really excited about doing this study. It will be interesting to see how it plays out in the military population. I think overall, people with chronic pain often view pain mostly as situated in the body, and so we often turn first towards medical treatment. But as many of you know, chronic pain is so much more complex than that, and really involves biological components, psychological components, as well as social components. And the music therapy protocol that we developed is really trying to take a three-pronged approach and trying to address some of the factors that kind of belong in those three big bubbles, if you wish, to begin to change the experience of pain for these service members.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Bradt. And now we are going to open up for a group discussion with all four of our panelists. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. It's certainly been so interesting to hear each of you speak about your studies individually. And now that we've come together for a group discussion, I'd like to invite a dialogue among the four of you regarding any implications that your Creative Forces funded studies have for the future of the creative arts therapies clinical research and for the advancement of art therapy and music therapy research more generally. So I'd like to invite Dr. Chatterjee to begin the discussion.
I think the implications for this study are really aspirational, and I would frame it as asking three kinds of questions, which is who, what, and why. With who, we can ask the question of who actually benefits. Not all military personnel who are experiencing trauma are the same. Is there something about their phenomenology? Is there something about the biology? If they've also had traumatic brain injury, do they benefit in the same way? So really understanding who is going to benefit, I think, is important. The what has to do with what's the magic ingredient. Most people here, probably on this call, believe art therapy works, but what is it about art therapy that really helps people, and how? How do we measure that? Measure what the benefits are? And the why is really about the biology of this. Like, what is it about our nervous system that is traumatized, either psychologically and in some instances physically, that leads to the kind of emotional dysregulation that many people, many of our veterans experience? And then what's the biology of change? And can we use the biology to actually predict who is going to improve? At the end of this, what I hope happens is this opens the door mostly for more research. To be realistic, I don't think we're going to be able to answer these questions in these pilot studies. I think it will point us in the right direction. And we desperately need more support for research, with the ultimate goal that we will be able to generalize from these studies to broader clinical populations and populations of people who are traumatized, not just by what they experience in war, but in other parts of our lives where people are so traumatized. So I view this as aspirational. It's a first step, but by no means the last step.
Great points. Thanks so much, Dr. Chatterjee. Dr. Williamson, also leading an art therapy study, did you have a follow-up to Dr. Chatterjee's remarks on this topic?
Yes. So I think the interdisciplinary collaboration here in terms of ideas. So talking to Gurija Kaimal, who's our Drexel professor and co-PI on our project here, about how she thinks about post-traumatic stress disorder, to me has been a good experience. So this has been a good experience because, of course, people are coming at these questions from different spaces, and that can result in some synergy or threads that unite that allow us to approach problems in a different way that might be successful for people moving forward. It takes a lot of effort and time and money to develop a treatment and bring it to actual deployment. And we do treatments. This is true in a pharmacotherapy space. It's true in a psychotherapy space, often without that empirical support necessarily fully realized. So the willingness of the National Endowment of Arts and the Henry Jackson Foundation to fuel the development of this, to take the initiative in developing the preliminary data that we need to adequately design a additional trial afterwards is critical to doing this. And we need more empirically supported treatments for patients with post-traumatic stress disorders and other conditions that involve similar functional neuroanatomy, including anxiety-related conditions that many veterans suffer from, generalized anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, things that could be amenable to this treatment approach or a variant of this treatment approach in the future. So as Dr. Chatterjee said, and I want to echo, I think the opportunity here is for the development of more research to learn new things about how veterans and people interact with these therapeutic approaches in a controlled way with the measurement of mechanism as part of that process. So not only can we see, does it work, but we can have some idea of why or how it works to better target it moving forward. And in the future, we may be considering dosing options or specific threads of our engagement or the time within specific components as individualized things that we can exploit to result in a better outcome. And I think really that's what I have to say. So thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Williamson. That's fantastic to hear from the two of our principal investigators on the art therapy studies. And now from the music therapy perspective, Dr. Bradt, can you share with us a little bit your thoughts about how these studies are implicated for the future of creative arts therapies clinical research and for the advancement of music therapy research more generally?
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, so the RFA for the music therapy studies was specifically focused on examining music therapy for chronic pain management. And, you know, chronic pain is such a major health problem. And I think all of us are familiar with the consequences of not so effective treatment for chronic pain. We're in the midst of an opioid crisis, which is absolutely staggering and has resulted partly because of our extreme focus on the medical treatment of chronic pain. It's very interesting that the opioid crisis is much less prevalent in Europe, for example, than it is in the United States. And I think it has to do with how we approach the management of chronic pain. And it's important that we begin to put some research dollars behind the research of non-pharmacological interventions. And that certainly has happened for some other non-pharmacological interventions, such as acupuncture or mindfulness-based stress reduction, but not so much yet in terms of music therapy. And it's interesting to me, participants in our study will very often say, wow, I listen to music all the time, but I never thought of using music for my pain, or I never thought that music could help me with my pain in this or that way. And so that's really the challenge that we have ahead of us. Can we begin to help people learn how to use music and music therapy for pain management? It's also really interesting that a lot of music therapists work with people with chronic pain, yet we have very little research on the use of music therapy interventions for chronic pain. That is true in civilian population and even more so in military population. To my knowledge, there's very little research on the effect of music therapy for chronic pain management in military population. Yet, as I alluded to before, the prevalence of chronic pain is much higher in the military, up to 86% for service members who also have mild traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, for example. So it is a huge problem that we urgently need to put additional effort behind. And I think the two previous speakers alluded to the fact that this is just the initial step, right? The same for music therapy. With the funding, we are able to do these initial feasibility studies, which are so important before we can move to what Sunil referred to at the beginning of the talk, randomized controlled trials. And so right now it's about establishing that music therapy is acceptable with the service members, that it is, to look if there's some preliminary evidence that it's effective, and then gradually build the evidence base from there. So that hopefully, and referring back to Anjan's remark about aspirational, aspirational here as well, but hopefully we'll reach a point in the future where music therapy can be actually considered as part of an integrative treatment for pain management.
Thanks so much, Dr. Bradt. And Dr. Story, I'll give you the last word on this topic as we wrap up.
Sure. Just first, I want to echo again what Dr. Bradt said, that these early studies of feasibility and acceptability are so important in terms of building the evidence-based research and building evidence-based practice that we need in the fields of music therapy and other creative arts therapies. And also, again, that chronic pain and PTSD are such complex issues and disorders that it is so important that we have these interdisciplinary teams that are approaching the issues and the problems from different perspectives. So again, that we can move, beyond the things that have been researched maybe longer than creative arts therapies, but bringing in the music therapy and the art therapy as another perspective and another way to address the issues.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We do have about 5 minutes left before we move into Q&A segment of our webinar today. So I'd like to, keeping our panelists here on screen with us, just to, give a kind of a personal perspective on this. So Dr. Bradt and Dr. Story are music therapists and researchers, and Dr. Chatterjee is an investigator in neurology and psychology, and Dr. Williamson is a researcher in psychiatry and neuroscience. So all of you come from distinct backgrounds, and yet the connecting thread here is, of course, your interest in the creative arts therapies and the research studies that you're working on right now. What role do the arts have in your own lives? And let's start with Dr. Story.
Well, it's a really interesting and fun question. I think that I can't imagine my life without music, and I started learning to play and read music about the same time that I learned to start reading words. So it's been a part of my life from the very beginning. I still play every day. I occasionally perform, and my family is all musical. So I feel like it's just a part of my everyday life, and I can't really separate the two. And I have to say that I use music myself in therapeutic ways as well. So beyond using it to perform and to make music with my family, I also use it to relax and to motivate myself during the day to get things done as well. So it's very important.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Dr. Bradt, how about you?
Yeah, so I actually trained first to become a music teacher in my home country, Belgium, and completed my studies there, but then realized I wanted to do more. I wanted to have an impact beyond the classroom, and decided to become a music therapist, got a grant to come study in America. And so in my personal life, the arts really had a significant impact in that it made me uproot my life, pack it up in 2 suitcases, travel around the ocean, across the ocean, on the airplane, make me wonder, what am I doing? Why am I leaving all my loved ones behind to go study in a country where I didn't know anybody? But now, many, many, many years later, I have a family here, I'm a music therapist, and right now, the joy of the arts in my life is really manifested through my two daughters who love to and who are quite talented musicians, and we just love playing music together. And I would say it's just something really special about being able to connect with your children through music and making music together.
Absolutely. That's wonderful to hear. Thank you, Yoka. And Dr. Williamson, I know you said you're not a visual artist, but is there another form of arts that you engage in your life?
Yes, certainly I lack the visual skill, but I grew up around music. I started playing percussion in elementary school. I went to a School of the Arts magnet for middle school. My brother and I played in bands together growing up, and I started off briefly as a music major in college, and I've continued to play drums in various venues off and on throughout my adult life. And as I got more into this neuroscience path, it's always percolated in the back of my mind, this question of the intersection of neuroscience and music. How does the brain process music and arts? And it's fun for me to think about and do, and to have it be something that can be useful in an applied sense is very appealing. So the space of art therapy and music therapy is quite fascinating. And I think that it would be odd for me not to be involved with and thinking about music and the arts as I age here.
Great. Thank you, John. Appreciate that. And last but not least, Dr. Chatterjee, what can you share with us about this?
I grew up in India in the 1960s, and it was in a context in which we had no TV, very limited access to books, and going to a movie was a big deal. So it was a relatively impoverished visual culture, especially compared to what kids right now grow up in. But what we did do was we drew a lot. My friends and I would go out and we'd draw together. And that just got built in to my habits and practices. And when I was in college, I took courses in drawing, sculpture, printmaking, and that continued to be of interest, which went by the wayside through the sort of the dark holes of medical school and residency, where there really wasn't time to do much else. And then I returned to photography and have been, with varying degrees of obsession over the last 30 years, have done photography, which has been a comfort and a solace. And I would just point out, for many people, I think in the pandemic, people discovered that doing creative things has been a real comfort to them. And what I discovered is that cooking, which I would regard as a creative endeavor, especially if you cook freestyle and don't really bother with recipes very much, is something that if I cook a lot, I'm not doing photography. If I do photography a lot, I'm not cooking. They seem to be drawing on the same resources.
Indeed. I would like to throw gardening in there as well. And there's many other, of course, creative endeavors, and that's a topic for another conversation. In these last 15 minutes, we've had a few interesting questions come in already for the Q&A. So let's switch gears here with our four panelists here on the screen. We've had some questions related to the actual interventions and biomarkers in particular. For example, are biomarkers part of these studies? If so, what are the biomarkers and which methods are being used to measure them? Panelists, which of you, I know each of you could speak to this, of course. Anyone jumping to address this one for us at the top?
Sure. So we have a few different markers we're using, though I'm not sure about the marker term in this context, but we are measuring things that we think are neurophysiologically relevant to PTSD. So those measures include fMRI. So we're measuring functional connectivity. So the relationship of activity between different brain regions And we're using two different approaches for that. So one is a resting state approach. So we're just having people lay down in a MRI scanner for, say, 8 minutes or so and do nothing. Though I think doing nothing is easier said than done. But this is an area of investigation called resting state. And there are data showing differences in connectivity between various brain regions associated with different functions in resting state, including mood, PTSD, and also in therapeutic resolution. So there's correlations between changes in these resting state connectivity indices and therapy success in patients with anxiety-related conditions and also post-traumatic stress disorder. Also within the MRI environment, we're using a technology called magnetic resonance spectroscopy. Now this one's a little bit more experimental. So we are able to measure GABA, which is the brain's primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. Our group has previously published data relating GABA to cognitive performance in older adults. And there's some data that have come out over the past few years, and it's relatively new, by the way, that we're able to, in vivo, in humans, measure GABA reliably. So it's a developing area, but there are some data showing that it modulates the activity of brain networks that might be relevant to emotional regulation. So we want to see if there's changes in this over time with therapy, and if that associates at all with what we see in terms of the functional connectivity metrics that we're looking at. We also have a task that we're developing with masks using an emotional NBAC task. These traumatic masks that Creative Forces has published before. And we're hoping to develop that task to give us a frontal limbic probe to look at changes in that system over time with treatment. In addition to that, we're using actigraphy with Fitbits to measure sleep quality throughout participation in the study. Now, Fitbit claims that they can measure heart rate variability, and this is unfortunately proprietary, so we don't have access to that data, but meaning that I can't evaluate it against our typical methods for heart rate variability measurement, but we will record that, we will analyze that, and the sleep quality metrics that we can get from that. So those are the bioneuromarkers that we're using in our work.
Great, thanks, Dr. Williamson. Let's hear from one of our music therapy researchers. We have a couple of questions related to biomarkers. So again, also underscoring, folks would like to hear what the actual interventions are in your studies, if you can weave that into your response. But the next question related to biomarkers, so how do the data acquired in these studies inform how these music therapies are composed? Are there particular frequency bands, tempi, rhythms, or other musical features that have proven effective in these therapies?
Yeah, I think we get that question a lot, right, Maya? Whether there's certain frequencies or certain, and there's certainly work that is being done by by music psychologists around music perception, its effect on contributing factors to pain, such as stress and mood, which all help influence how one perceives their pain in a given moment. But the actual work of what we do in music therapy is not so much sitting with a control knob, trying to control the frequencies and while keeping the harmonies constant. It's much more an interactive reality of very often involving active music making. So the participant or the client will be actively making music with the music therapist. And so that music is ever evolving. So it's not an easy question to answer. It is a question that is that you can answer within a laboratory setting and where you truly control, you compose a novel music stimulus and then you control certain frequencies or you control harmonies or tonality to see what the impact might be. But my question always back is, what would be the relevance of that? Because when we listen to music, we want to listen to music that is pleasant to us. We want to listen to music that is on our downloaded on our playlist in our iPhone. And I don't think that patients would be eager to start listening to some new music and manipulate just the frequency a bit higher or lower or tonality, you know, major to minor, just because some researchers have said that that might be more effective. I don't think there is a one-to-one relationship between music input and the experience of music, and then let alone the experience of pain. I think the picture is much more complex. And I think we need, my viewpoint is, and Maya, I'll let you talk, but my viewpoint is that we need to let the music be as complex as it is, and without trying to only hone in to certain elements of the music in that one-to-one fashion. What do you think, Maya?
I agree, and I feel that the complexity of the music is what makes it so unique to each individual. So I could play the same piece of music for everyone on the panel right now, and we may have different reactions to it. And even though in our study we're using music listening, it's music that is chosen by the veteran, not by the therapist. So the premise behind it is that the veteran's relationship to music is part of the mechanism or the magic of what makes it work. So it's not the therapist saying, this song is going to make your back stop hurting for whatever reason, but it's the relationship that the veteran has with the music and their associations with it that actually help them be able to use the music in a positive way for their pain.
Thank you both. And then Dr. Chatterjee, was there anything you would like to speak to related to the questions that have been asked so far related to biomarkers and or interventions used in your art therapy study?
The interventions that we're using, John alluded to a little bit. This is the use of masks and painting on masks that Melissa Walker and her group at NICO have been using for a considerable amount of time. And so that will be done both at the beginning and at the end of the intervention. I'm pretty sure it's an 8-week study, and people will be doing various other kinds of artwork in between. One of the questions we have is, how emotionally expressive are these masks? And one of the premises behind the idea is that this kind of output is a way for people to lean into their emotional experience without having to use words. But the question is, how successful are they in doing that? And so we have also developed some ways of trying to understand, if you take any visual image, how do we know what is being communicated from that? And so we have, I mentioned this earlier, developing a taxonomy for what it is that people could possibly express, and trying to see at the same time, using some recent analytic methods called semantic network analysis, which Alex Christensen in my lab has been developing, to try to understand what is it the veterans are expressing, and does that expression change over time? And the relationship with language becomes absolutely critical, because that's what therapists are going to be doing, which is talking through what their experience is. So that's on the intervention side. The biomarker side is very similar to what John mentioned, which is we're using resting state for the same reasons John mentioned, looking at different resting state networks. The task evoked part of our fMRI study is a little bit different, where we will be using emotionally resonant images to see how people are reacting to these images. So not the masks that other people have made, but images that have been used in other studies, and also where people are asked to try to regulate their emotions in response to those images. And our hope is to be able to query these data, both for what is it like when people start out, and what is the relationship between that and the clinical measures and some of the experimental measures that we are deriving, and then how does that change over time? And so combined with that, we're hoping between the psychology, the experimental methods, the clinical measures, and these biomarkers, we have some sense of who improves, how do they improve, and be able to target down the road for who would be best served by these kinds of interventions.
Exactly. Great points. Thank you, each of you, for your input on those great questions from our audience. And indeed, many of the points that you've made here are reflected in a lot of our documents that are found at our National Resource Center, such as through our strategic framework and 5-year agenda for research, our conceptual framework document, and so forth. There's one more question that I will briefly respond to before we wrap up here and close for the day. We got a question, despite all the wonderful research, folks throughout the military are still not aware of the value and capabilities of the creative arts therapies. How can we accelerate their understanding and create new programs to reach more service members and veterans? I will say that, first of all, that's a really good point. We have, thanks to the National Endowment for the Arts, the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs, and our partner, the Henry M. Jackson Foundation for the Advancement of Military Medicine. The Creative Forces Network, I think, is doing a great service to the United States in getting these services out to those who need it most, military-connected populations and their families and communities. But certainly, as has been talked about today, more support is needed, more awareness, more increased access to the services, not just in the military context, but just in general, different populations that benefit from our services. And certainly research is, of course, the way to do this as well. That's why we're here today. That is why we have these 4 funded studies, and why we are continuing in our research efforts to expand our research to get to more people and help, in turn, to increase access to the services we provide. And we can certainly say a lot more about that, but unfortunately, we need to close. I really thank each of our panelists today. Thank you all so much. What a really fascinating discussion. Hopefully the audience has benefited. We will be making this recorded webinar available on the National Resource Center soon. And for now, I will turn it over very briefly to Sunil Iyengar, who is going to close out the session for the day. Thank you.
Yes, indeed, Donna, very briefly. So thank you again very much for joining us today, everyone, and to all our illustrious panelists, and to Dr. Betts and Henry M. Jackson Foundation and others. And for those of you who had questions, if we didn't have time to address them, they will be posted to the National Resource Center, Creative Forces nrc.arts.gov. So now's the time to go to that website. Thanks, and have a great remainder of the week.
For more information, refer to the National Resource Center at creativeforcesnrc.arts.gov.